Hello, good morning. How are you? I've actually started a full minute early. Uh, Normally I start at 2 o'clock and the camera breaks. Look, all my cameras are working. Brilliant. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for Stacey Lee. Just as I kind of press the button, you were sharing the stream, so thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Today, as you can see, my board is blank. Some might say a bit like my brain sometimes. But the reason why it's blank is that last week I was working on a painting that's been in my studio for a couple of years. Long process, long story behind it. It's a range of work called Mammalian, and I got to a certain stage with the paintings. I just thought the paintings aren't what's in my head. I'm not getting on the canvas what it is I want to achieve, and what is it that's not quite right. And some of it was my skill level just wasn't quite there. I knew what I wanted to do, but I couldn't quite get it there. And through process of kind of researching how to do things, looking at other artists and going back to the books and practicing, I slowly developed up to a certain skill level where I got a little bit better, to the point where COVID hit and stopped everything. And luckily enough, Sky Arts started to produce their Portrait Artist of the Week, and it got me engaged into just painting and drawing again. And it's kind of refired my interest into painting. Along with that, there's been plenty of other podcasts and broadcasts out there which have been really truly inspiring, one of which is by Dan Ferguson and Manny D'Souza, who have an art chat basically on a Friday at about 6 o'clock on Instagram. And just listening to those guys and looking at what they were creating, I was just going, do you know what, I've got to pull my finger out and get on with it. And it's something that I have wanted to do and get back to, and I just thought, well, just do it now. So I grabbed a canvas, put it back on the easel, and started to play with the portrait that I was doing, and I'm really engaged back into doing it. So I was doing that last week, and I was having a chat saying, like, if there's anything you want to know or learn or to do, or you're having problems with your artwork, tell me what it is and we can have a chat about it and try and figure some things out together. And one of our lovely fellow artists out there asked if it was okay. It was Michael from last week. Asked if talking about shading and form and how you do light with pencils and graphite. So I said, you know what, I'll do that next week. So this is this week, and this is what I was going to do. So it's down to you guys. The more you ask and chat in the chat bar, the more we'll get done. I'm just going to look at light in a very simple form and shading and tone, etc., in a very simplistic way, so you can take some of the aspects of it and put it into your drawings. Experiment and play with it is one of my biggest tips. Is don't be afraid to make mistakes. You know, if you're working through a sketchbook and you're working out an idea, it's a good place to practice the technique before you go to your canvas, because the pressure builds up. You know, this is a picture and I've got to get it right, and all that kind of angst kind of starts to build, and it can be the wall that stops you from getting on with your artwork. So I would say practice, play with it, having a separate piece of paper or a separate bit of canvas beside you till you can kind of work out colours, or you can work out textures, and experiment with that first. Once you've got it on your experimental page, if you like, it's built up a certain skill level, but also a certain amount of confidence that you know how to do it, and you just place it in your picture. Sounds simple, and it actually is simple, but simple can be really hard sometimes, and you've got to kind of battle through it. And that's why I was saying to artists, try not to get so frustrated that you rip your artwork up and you chuck it away. Keep hold of it, because reviewing back on what you've done can show you how much you have actually progressed in your artwork, which can help build your confidence in your artwork and your drawing. And also reflecting back, you might see some qualities in an older work that you really love and you kind of maybe not recognized at the time, and you can pull those elements back out and put them back into your work again. Looking at other artists' work rather than going, oh, there's some brilliant artists out there, why should I bother, I'm not very good. Use them as a source of inspiration. Try and see the qualities that you really like in their artwork, and pull out from that what works for you and try them in your artwork. Now say we're going to talk about form and light and texture and things. It sounds more complicated than it is. When you work out a form, a shape, no matter what it is, it could be a teacup, it could be a dog, it could be a cat, it could be a tree, it could be a person. They have a certain physicality, a three-dimensionality to them. Now, obviously, depending on your art genre, this might apply to you and not apply to you. But even if you're working in abstract expressionist style, you still want to create an illusion of depth. What is coming forward, what is being pushed back, what is subtle and quiet, what is loud and bright. So you can work out form and textures like that as well. But it's how you can control light and shade and dark and tone and those elements within your artwork. So I was going to work on just a simple form. You've probably seen it 1,000 times before, but I want to go through some of the techniques and just little tips that I've got that I've kind of stumbled across through research and just experimentation and playing with my materials basically, which has allowed me to build up a certain skill box, toolbox of techniques that I can dip in and out of when I want to. So when I see a form or a texture, I don't get swamped going, oh my god, how do I do that? I try and see the qualities of the textures or the qualities of the form, go back into my sort of toolbox of knowledge and experience that I've built up, and just cherry pick what is closest to it, try that out, tweak it a little bit, and then put that into the artwork. So I hope that all makes sense. We're going live on Facebook, YouTube and Twitch all at the same time. So wherever you are, when you join the chat, do say hello. Even if it's just to say hi, that you're sitting in the back lurking. Lurking's a good terminology used a lot on Twitch, where you can be getting on with your work and you can just sit back in the chat room and watch others work. I've done a couple of that this week myself. So there was a couple over on Twitch, which I will try and give a shout out to if I can remember their names. I've got a terrible memory for names. Let me see if I can get that out there. No, my internet's not working now. No, it's slow anyway. Listen, there was a couple I was watching on Twitch this week, and they were just getting on with the painting and chatting and drawing, and each one of them were throwing out these little nuggets of knowledge. Michael, hello, good to see you. You tuned in and you're sharing on Facebook. Great, it's good to see you. Well, this is for you and everybody else, but you requested this last week talking about form, light and shade and tone and things. So basically, tone, dark and light, how you transition from one to the other and vice versa and then back again. But it all goes around the idea of form and shape and things. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I do have a little video that I did earlier on this week talking about perspective as well, and what was really funny about it, when I was making the video for it, I was sat kind of drawing it sort of off camera so you could just see my hand, but I was like drawing at a kind of really obscure angle, and I found it really hard to draw it because that's not how I normally draw. I'm normally sitting in front of the easel and I can see what I'm doing, but I've drawn it off to an angle. I tried to draw a square. It's the worst square I've ever drawn in my life. Even Andrea, when she read it, she went, "You can't even draw a square." I went, "I know." And then I did a circle, same thing happened. Circle was all over the place. But it's how you refine it. My biggest tip is when you're starting off, is do it lightly, so you can adjust it. I'm going to start off with a simple shape. I'm going to start off with a circle. And you can see how light I'm doing this circle. I'm going to use this simple shape to transition from one thing to another thing, and to work out the shapes of light as well that move around it. Now, a sphere is basically a circle. The only reason you can tell it's a sphere is because of how the light falls on it, and it's how you transition from a light to a dark. You know, what is in the background, what's in the foreground. You use the background to give you a sense of three-dimensionality that pushes light forward. Generally, when things are lighter, they appear closer. When things are darker, they recede into the background. Edges, how sharp they are, and how soft they are, and how you can control one thing to another thing. So, say for example, I've got my circle lightly sketched out. You can see it barely. If I zoom in a little bit, you might get to see it a little bit closer. Hang on, here we go. Filming with camera's never a good thing because it normally goes horribly wrong. So, I think you can see that a little bit better. I've done it so lightly. If I wanted to tone that in, if I scribbled it, if I would say I wanted to just get a flat circle, a flat even tone, and say it was a good thing to practice still. If I was to quickly do it like that, you can see, in fact, I'll move it around a little bit more so you can see it. Let's wait for my screens to catch up. As you can see, I'm working by myself. There is nobody moving the cameras for it. It's literally juggling two things at the same time. Click the other camera up there. That's good. So I've got Facebook. Oh, you're over on YouTube, Michael. Sorry. So I forget where people are. I've got my 3 screens up so I can see. So yeah, if I was to quickly try and shade it all in, and I'd make like the zigzag pattern which we normally get to see in our work. The problem is, in each individual space in between each pencil stroke, there is a white space. And it doesn't matter how hard I press, if I kept doing that and going backwards and forwards, pressing harder and harder to try and fill it all in, it never really appears to be dark. Michael, you're saying, yeah, blending techniques to produce soft roundness in portraits, cheeks and chins and necks and things. Yeah, it's how one shape flows into another shape, because it's not flat. We're trying to create the illusion depth. So this is one of the problems I see a lot of people do. Doesn't matter how hard you press on your pencil, you're still missing pieces of the page as you do it. And it will always appear lighter and also has a texture on it, and because it's maybe pressing too hard here and lighter up here and then harder down here and then lighter over here, this is kind of really undulating surface that starts to appear in the work, and it feels quite scratchy looking. That's okay if that's the effect that you want. I'm not saying you have to have it smooth and soft and sort of totally flawless. If that's the texture that you want to achieve, fine, but often it's because we're not taking our time to build up a tone. So I'm going to swing that back a little bit. I'm going to lightly go over that circle with just a very light application of graphite. Now I can take my time doing this, and you can see I'm kind of like working it backwards and forwards. I'm trying to create it that the pressure on the pencil is exactly the same. I'm not pressing harder or softer, but I'm taking my time to fill it in without any lines in between each pencil stroke. And I'm taking it way past the edge of the circle as well. And you might think, oh no, if you go over the circle it won't look like a sphere in the end. It will, because we will refine the edges at another stage. But because this is a light sphere, what I'm doing is giving myself a ground or a base layering of pencil that I can actually take off a little bit to create extra highlights, but also can build upon to create darks and tone. So say for example this was the cheek or this was the chin, I can control where the highlight is or the darker elements are, and I can slowly build that up. So say I'm just literally toning that to be the same all over. It's a nice exercise to do. You can build up your confidence this way in how you handle materials. And as you can see, the pencil that I'm using has a really long point on it, and I'm holding it at the end of the pencil. This feels a bit weird to begin with, but try it because it gives you a greater control over your pressure on the pencil, on the paper, sort of how hard your pencil is resting on the paper as you go backwards and forwards. So I'm creating a nice, even, flat surface. I can soften that a number of ways. The paper itself will always have a slight undulating surface to it. All papers have a surface texture, a paper texture. Depending on how thick it is, you can get some very rough surface paper. I actually go for a smooth surface paper, but even doing this, you will see if I zoom in, hopefully the camera can pick this up a little bit, you can see the surface texture. My camera's freaking out because I've gone so close. I'll try and give it something to focus on. There we are. You can see the textural quality of the paper, and that's because how paper is made. Even though this is a smooth paper, it still has a surface to it, and we're gliding the pencil above the surface, or on the surface, and it's not quite getting into all the grooves and nooks and crannies. Now, I've seen as well people use the tullions, the paper stubs, and they push the graphite into the paper and they sort of scrub the paper to make it go dark. That's quite abrasive to the surface. Also, if you want to lift some part of that out later, it gets really difficult because you've pushed it so far into the paper it's almost stained it. Even though it's pencil and you can rub it out, if you stain the paper, it's almost impossible to lift it out. So I always say start your process off lightly and build upon that to create the darks and the lights, rather than scrubbing it in just to fill it in quickly. If you slow down a little bit, you'll speed up your drawing. That sounds weird, I know, but there is a phrase called slow is fast and fast is slow. If you try and make it quickly, it won't look right and you'll have to do it again, which slows you down. Also can demoralize you a little bit because it didn't go right, and then you just go, I'm no good at this. If you slow down and take your time doing it, it feels mechanical to begin with, but as you do it more often, it becomes a natural process and it becomes easier and quicker. So just that little bit of practice doing a simple technique can really speed up your drawing. What I've also got is a soft brush, very, very soft brush. You can get these for watercolouring and for use for acrylic paints as well, but it's a soft man-made fibre rather than a natural. You can use natural ones as well, but they're very expensive, and you just want a soft brush. All I'm going to do is lightly brush the surface rather than heavily push the graphite into the surface. What I'm doing here is unifying all of those pencil marks that I've put onto the paper. Even though it was flat to begin with, I'm just unifying the shape. And again, going right over the edge of that circle, because I can sculpt it later. There's other things I'm going to do. I can add background, foreground and things, and something that this sphere is going to sit on. So I can build those things up and create the illusion of an edge of the sphere. So it's how one thing transitions into another one. The sunlight has just come out in Northern Ireland. I don't know if you can see this. It's completely lit up the page. Hopefully give me a bit more light so you can see this better. So soft brush. You can also use tissue paper or a cotton wool ball. In my many dusty boxes here, I use these like little cotton pads from for removing makeup and things, because they've got the nice handy side of a cotton wool ball, and you can do the same thing if you haven't got a brush. Just lightly, again this is lightly, go over that surface and just lightly push that graphite into all those grooves and undulating surfaces of the paper's texture, and it starts to take on a base tone, and it can feel like it's too dark. This is way too dark, but this might be the lightest part of my sphere, and as I darken everything else down, it appears really light. Often when you're painting and drawing, there's nothing as white as your canvas or as white as your paper when you're creating your drawing. The highlight is often at the lightest part of the object that you're doing, which is very seldom white. And we can use the paper to give us a certain lightness. We can rub through to give us a very, very strong highlight. You know, or if you're painting, you can use a white to maybe put a very strong highlight on, say, a sparkle from a piece of jewellery, things like that. But often, say, the white of the eye isn't white, and the highlight on the eyeball itself, normally on the pupil, isn't also white. It's a slight greyish note of a light. It's a greyish colour if you're painting. It's a very, very light grey, or a light tone of the thing itself. That makes sense. If none of this makes sense, by the way, you can have a conversation. You can tell me, I don't quite understand yet. We'll get through this. But if there's any questions you have, do please put them up in the chat. All my chats are open in each of the different places, so we can talk about those things. So, first of all, layer and then soften. I might want to put this on a surface, so I can give myself a guide as to where that might be. So I can create, say, a horizon line. I did my perspective video this week, just to break down some real simple basics. I mean, they are very simple. The videos I've been doing are just a starting off point. As you go into something, obviously there's more information, and it becomes even more and more subtle and detailed and nuanced. But I give you a very, very basic guide to perspective this week on the YouTube video. And this is often the eye level that you're looking at an object. We call it the horizon line because it's just a straight line, and it could be anything. This could be the edge of the table. But it gives us a certain perspective of how we're actually looking at the object. And it's the same thing that when you're creating the illusion of a face, and you're trying to create that three-dimensionality, you are looking at it from your own point of view. So whether you've taken it from a photographic reference and you've used a camera to take it, that camera is the eye of the viewer, and you're left with the image. You're looking at it from one point of view. If you can add other elements to it and change different perspectives, I've seen it during the Sky Portrait Artist of the Week, where people had 3 or 4 faces of the same person kind of put together, and each one was just slightly different. That's okay if it's a part of controlled conceptual piece in your artwork, but generally if you're just doing the one face, you're looking at it from one point of view. So if you've got, say, somebody's head looking straight on, what you can't do is start to try and draw their face from down here and change the aspects of their jawline, because it won't look quite right on a face that looks straight forward. So you've got to kind of check your form first. Give yourself some guidance as to what your object, your face, your dog, your cat, where are they at? They'll be starting off with a simple sphere, so it's a simple circle, but this could be a face, you know, it could be the side of the head that we're looking at, and the nose comes out here, and then the chin, the jaw. But how you can control light is that it's a three-dimensional object, so it has a space and a form, and that's something you need to start to see in your mind's eye when you're drawing something. See it in its three-dimensionality. Even though we can't quite see the other side of it, we want to create the illusion that there's a depth to it, and this is where this sense of form comes in, and the controlling of a pencil from going light to dark. It's a very similar technique that if you're using charcoal, do it lightly. Start off with a harder charcoal and use it very lightly. When you're using pencil, start off with a harder pencil and do it lightly, just to begin with. People often navigate towards the softer pencils because they put more graphite down, but they become quite heavy and creamy and fluid, and if you're not using them with sensitivity, it can become too dark too quick. Here we've got a very light application of graphite. In my background, I want it to appear just a little bit darker to push my form, my ball, forward a little bit. So I'm gonna, even though I've got this scratchy element just hiding behind that sort of those time-lapse screens that you can see, I'm going to create another application just behind my form. And again, taking my time, to come right up to the sphere itself. You see also I'm going in the same direction, I'm not shifting my angle. That often adds another texture and people kind of go, oh, I'm bored, I'll change, I'll start doing it this way, oh, I'll get bored, I'll do it that way, or I'll change the paper around and I'll keep my arm going in the same direction, but I'll just keep shifting the paper around. Don't change the paper around, don't change your direction, keep going in the same direction, because if you start adding different directions in your pencil strokes, you create a texture. If you're trying to create a soft, flat space, as doing in this demonstration, you want to keep the angle of your pencil going in the same direction to aid you in that. If you change your direction, you'll add a texture to it and it'll stop. You're kind of creating a technique, and it might look great for some things, but in general terms, you want your tones or your shading to have a certain consistency. So this is an exercise to build up that consistency, where you're not adding a texture, you're building a form to give you the illusion of your object. And so this could be a face, a head, or whatever. I'm just subtly darkening this background. You can see me going backwards and forth, so if I've got a slightly harder pencil stroke, I'm trying to match the pencil strokes around it. I'm going to come right around this side as well. I'm actually going over the edge of the circle again, but I'm still doing it quite lightly. There's nothing on this page so far that if I decide to remove it with an eraser, that I couldn't do it and take back to the paper quite easily. Rubbing out on your paper, do it lightly. Don't scrub your paper. Often it's a level of frustration that's built up because things aren't going well and you've got to scribble it out or rub it out, and people sort of scrub their paper so hard it actually destroys the surface of the paper, and it can really deteriorate very quickly. And if you're trying to build up your layer on top of paper that's kind of been ripped up on the surface a little bit, it gets quite difficult. So I'm building up just simple base applications of pencil. And this is the starting off point of building up your tones. I'm starting to see what's light and dark, if I need to add more to it or take some off. So just take your time doing it. It's quite therapeutic once you kind of relax into it, rather than it becoming sort of a race to get it done and finished. That level of when we're trying things out for the first time, we want to get the experience over and done with, because it's like a fear. And what I'm saying to you is just enjoy this part. It's kind of therapeutic. You know what you're doing. You're just putting down a layer of graphite. You don't have to think about it too much. You're building up your technique, and every time you do it, it'll become easier. And every time you do something, it becomes easier. It becomes less of a fear, and you can become more reliant on your skill, and you can call upon it when you need to. So, for example, doing a face transitioning from light to dark is often about edges. This is why I chose a sphere today, because how light falls around a sphere, three-dimensional shape, does certain things to light and shadow. So this might seem completely obscure to the thing that you want to draw, whether it be a cat or dog, etc. But all of these things have form and how light falls upon it, lights and darks, things. Faces have obviously different structure, have cheekbones as you mentioned, chins, etc., and how things move around. And they undulate. They go darker, lighter, darker, lighter, lighter, darker, darker, lighter, lighter. So they go up and down, or around a face, like this way. So where you might have... My face is quite bleached out in the bottom left-hand corner, just because of the way the camera's set up. I also have a beard, so you can't see my chin. But across my forehead, if I turn my head to the right-hand side, it's going to be darker here and lighter here because the light's coming in from this direction. But it's a transition between this light part and this dark part. Goes across this surface of my head. It's not flat. The paper's flat, but my head isn't. So you're trying to create an illusion from going from a light spot to a slightly darker place. And it doesn't mean that dark has to be your 9B pencil or a very, very dark, heavy application of charcoal. It's not that stark a difference. It can be very subtle. So if you build up your technique slowly, if you build up your layering slowly, you can build in that subtlety. What we need to do is understand where those lights change. And what I'm going to draw is some shadow shapes on my circle. So I have my circle, I have a background in, and I have a lighter base. Now, as I said before, the circle isn't flat, it's a sphere. And how light will fall on it is through observation. You can see it. Your light is never on the edge of an object. It's normally on the form itself. Through observation, you can see where that light is strongest, depending on the direction of the light source. So say, for example, my lightest light is going to be here. It's not also so much of a circle. It's almost like a moon shape, or a slight ovally shape, because it's stretching over the back this way and over this way and over this way and over that way, and it's a three-dimensional circle, but it's more like an ellipse rather than a spot. We also have a curve which comes around, and it's a transition into something what they call the core shadow. Your darkest dark on this whole sphere might not be black, but your core shadow and where that is. So I start to sketch that in lightly. Because this is a circle sitting on a table, it's going to have a connection to what it's sitting on. So often people think as this gets away from the light, it's obviously the darkest areas here, but you can get what they call reflected light that is bouncing back up onto your object off a table source, which is lighter. As the light strikes it, it's moving around your object and bouncing back on it again, so it's actually lighter here. Now, it's not as light as it is here. This is your heaviest, your strongest light. This is going to be crisper along the edges, so I can refine those as I go along as well. This is where my light's going to be. This is where my core shadow is as it goes around. And this is where my reflected light's going to be. There will be some edges that might be a little bit darker along this side, a little bit darker on that side, and then underneath you've got your shadow. Again, it's like a core shadow of your object, and depending on your light source, if it was straight up and it was almost like a spotlight, there'll be a very, very dark shadow here, but maybe not so much a very sharp shadow underneath the width of the ball or sphere underneath it, because the light source would be coming straight down, but it wouldn't kind of splay out. Depending on the angle of it, will throw out a shape or a shadow, and that'll be an ellipse as well. There'll be a slight darker area just underneath the ball, and you can change this. You can move these things around before you start rendering them, just to see what they look like. Because you're drawing so lightly, if you need to adjust anything at any time, you can at this point, and that's the process of drawing. It's not always about having everything in the perfect place first time straight away. You can consider your marks and take time in building them and place a mark, but that length of time you spend observing your object can help you do your placements of shadow shapes. And this is what I'm talking about, drawing shadow shapes. We have the object shape, and now I'm drawing the shadow shapes on the object. So it's the same thing when you're doing your face. Draw in lightly a guideline about where certain shadow shapes are. You may have done the positioning of the proportions of where your eyes, nose, ears, mouth comes, but don't try and draw an eye, ear, nose, mouth. Just draw the shapes of where they are and adjust those until they feel like they're in the right place. Then you can start layering in your tone or your form, light to dark, etc. And then you can go, okay, how the light would say fall over a face. Say for example, I've got a face up here of a portrait that I'm working on. Let's do that back this way. Of a portrait that I'm working on, and you see we can look at the eyes there, and how the shadow on this side is darker than this bit because this is lighter because it's in front, and then it gets slightly darker as it goes up the side, and then it gets lighter here because this is catching the light, and it gets darker on this side as it goes away. As it goes away from the light source, it's slightly lighter, sort of coming down this way onto the face. There'll be certain elements that catch the light stronger, so if the light is slightly more coming in this direction, there's slightly more light around the highest lights, like this little bit in front of the eye, than it is here. So although this is the same part on the object, corner of the eye, it's lighter here than it is here. So try and break down your object into its space, its forms. Michael, you're asking, so do base layer all over a face? Yeah. Then blocks of darker areas to find the eyes, nose, etc. Yeah. Or block in first and then do base layer. No, do your base layer first. Just a light tone, because you can always build upon your light tone. You can always take that light tone off to create the whiteness of your paper. Do your light tone first, then block in your shadow shapes of where things are. So if I was drawing this face, I would give myself the construction of the head. I could give myself a placement line of things like eyebrows, where the eyes come, how far away they are from each other, where maybe the nose line is, maybe the mouth line, but also I might draw the angles of how her mouth is open, line underneath the bottom lip, the line for the bottom of the chin. Basic structural marks, not the things themselves. Do a base layer all over, but then I'll start to see the forms. So I could look at the shape of this upper eyelid and create that as a shadow shape. I could create that as a shadow shape, and I could create that as a shadow shape. I could create this as a shadow shape. So rather than drawing the nose, if I drew the shadow shape underneath the nose, if I can just scroll that down a bit there, if I drew the shadow shape underneath the nose here, I'm actually drawing the nose without drawing the nose, if you know what I mean. If we draw the shadow shape, I don't have to do that line around it. Also, drawing lines around things, it can still look like the person, but it becomes very graphic and it won't capture that three-dimensionality because the lines start to attract the eye rather than the form. What we want to create is the illusion of the object, and things in real life don't have lines drawn around them. Now, you can leave those lines in if it's an artistic choice. If you are making artistic choices and you're happy with them, fine. But if you're trying to create the illusion of the object, whether you're going for reality or surreality or a representational style, very few things have lines drawn around them in life, unless you eat a lot of ready break. Remember those adverts from the 70s? For those who don't watch it from the UK, there used to be this advert where if you ate breakfast, ready break breakfast, it gave you this glowy line around you all day because it kept you warm. that was the premise of the advert. And as kids you go, yeah, I'm going to have some ready break and then I'll glow all day, and you never glowed, and you were quite disappointed that you didn't have this glowy line going around you. But you get the point that if you draw a line around everything, it's never going to quite have a sense of reality to it, because things don't have lines around them. If you're leaving those lines in for a graphic, artistic interpretation, fine, that's no problem. You're doing it with a sense of purpose. But to create the illusion of the object itself, very few things have lines around them. It's always about how one tone meets another tone to create the edge of something, and those edges can be hard or they can be soft or transition in between them. When it comes to the face, there is no line between a hard bit and a soft bit on the face. It becomes a transition. There might be small areas on the face, like the creases between the nostril and the cheek, which become two shapes which become quite tight against each other, which can give the illusion of a line. But even that tight line that you might put in with a pencil is actually a tight shadow. It's a shadow shape still. So think of it on those terms rather than lines. That makes sense. Hopefully that this is all kind of connected with you on some level. So I want to get back to doing this. Where are we? There we are. This circle. So hopefully this is starting to show up a little bit. It's quite difficult to see on your screen. Graphite's notoriously difficult to see on paper. I did that demonstration earlier on this week on perspective in a charcoal pencil. Again, it's a learning curve for me. As I was doing it, drawing off to one side, as I drew the oh, let's see, my cat has come in. As I drew on the paper, the charcoal was squeaking. So, like, when I was editing the video together, I was having to cut out sections of where I wasn't talking and drawing, because all you could hear is like the squeaky sound of the charcoal on the paper. So I'm learning these things as I go for demonstrations. So yeah, we've done our circle shape, we've done our base layer on it, we've done our background tone, we've done our shadow shapes, and our heavier shadow shape underneath. So we get the idea very lightly where things are. I'll wait for that the camera to kind of focus in on the pencil. Hopefully give you some better view of it. I'm going to brush over that again, just lightly. And again, when I'm doing the brushing over a surface of something, I do it in the same direction. I've got to come right through the ball itself and onto the table. And take that right across. The reason why I'm taking it right across is that this has got graphite on it now, and it gives me a very light application of graphite all over that base. Now we're going to go back in. Still the same pencil. I'm drawing with a B today. Now I know I said draw with an H, but it's just so you can see it, because if I was to draw with an H pencil, the camera would not pick it up, and you'd be staring at a blank piece of paper as I was talking, going, he's not actually drawing anything. But it's just that the camera wouldn't pick it up. If I darken this area again, this background, up to the edge of my sphere, you'll start to see the sphere appear more. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do the same application in the core shadows, the darkest shadows. So the shadow that is the darkest shadow on the ball, which I've already drawn the shape of, and the ellipse underneath the ball. But I'm going to use the same tone. It will get darker as I develop it. Take my time as I come around the edge there. Yeah, these shadows will get darker as I go around the edge of, as I go over them. But each time you're building up a layer of graphite, you're creating an illusion of that surface, of that form. So this is exactly how I do a face. If it was a dark area coming into a light area, so if this was the eye socket coming up to the bridge of the nose, it's the same process. It's a different thing, and depending on the object itself, it might have a texture to it, it might have a surface. So say for example it was a brick, obviously this would be a cube. One side of the cube would be darker than another side of the cube, but it might have certain textural quality on the top, what we call the face of the brick, might be smoother, and the other side of the brick might be quite rough and textured. But tonality wise, how the light strikes the brick, it'll be, say for example, lighter on top, mid-tone on one side and the darkest on another. Will give you that three-dimensionality to it. The textures on the brick are something that you can play around with. There's a billion different textures out there, there's a billion different techniques. It's about experimenting and playing with the right choices. I think the best way to describe or to do textures is to verbally describe it first. What type of surface is it? Is it rough and crusty? Well, then you need a rough and crusty application of your pencil. So don't try and do a smooth application on it, because you'll get a smooth surface. You need to do a rough and crusty application. How? So you start thinking, how can I do a rough and crusty application of graphite? Well, you might scrumple up a bit of paper, rub that into your graphite. You can create like a little pool of graphite on a paper by getting, say, an 8B and scribbling it down so it's just a big black blob on a scrap piece of paper, and scrub your crunkled up piece of paper into it, and then dab that onto your surface. So it's a bit like applying a texture. There's a billion different ways. You need to kind of play around mark making and experiment and have fun doing it. Fill up a sketchbook's full of different applications, and you can build up experiences that way, that you have a certain affinity to. Sorry, my cat's just gone out. A certain affinity with certain mark making textures, that when you look at something and go, oh, that's this soft texture I need, and oh, that's the crusty rough texture that I drew a brick on last week, but it's the right texture for doing the illusion of leaves on a tree and branches. That's actually what I need. You can use the same technique over and over again for different things. It doesn't have to be, oh, this is the only way I do bricks, I only use this texture. I'm using these for examples. I hope you kind of understand that and appreciate it. But yeah, get back to doing this tone. So I still want to darken this up. So as you take your brush over the surface of this, it will start to get lighter. So I'm going to apply it back on again, and then brush over it, and it'll get lighter but softer. It will eventually get darker. You'll be glad to hear. But you can see the form or the turning of that sphere starting to happen. I'm just taking my time fill this up nice and evenly. I had a really nice message today from Curtis, who was the Sky Portrait Artist of the Year winner from the TV program. He did the portrait last Sunday of Oti Mabuse, and it's got a wonderfully light application texturally. It's almost like if you blew on it, it would disappear off the page. And he's such a nice guy. He was, through the week, he'd been highlighting everybody's work, and so I sent him a little message to say thank you, basically, and he wrote a lovely message back. So he very kindly shared the art card this morning, which I'm very grateful for. But something I'm going to say to you: if you find an artist whose work you really admire and are sort of a living artist out there, and I know some of you do, some of you write lovely comments on my posts as well. Thank you so much for those. It's kind of good to touch base with them, because everybody's in the same state as you are. They might be a little bit more further on, but they're still discovering what they're doing. They're still pushing the limits of their expertise. They're still playing around and challenging themselves, and to write a comment on that they inspire you can give them a little bit of encouragement as well. But it also builds a community of artists up. It becomes more supportive. And I don't necessarily mean it in a sycophantic way that you're just sort of blowing smoke for no apparent reason, but that you really appreciate what they do, because that feedback is welcomed, I think, by a lot of artists. Not for ego-wise, but it just means that their work is making a connection which can be inspiring in itself. So, as you see, I am just doing this very light application all over. This isn't a heavy application, it's quite light, but already we're starting to see the form starting to appear of this sphere. I'm now going to carry on the same application I've done here, but I'm going to control it into the shape of this core shadow. So this is where the light's turning away. Light's hitting this part here, and as it turns away, it's going to be darkest on the object here. Put that shadow in, and depending on what's around it, this kind of have light reflected back upon it. But I'm just making this tone the same as the back at the moment. I will make it darker. It might be slightly darker on this side than it is, say, around this part. It might start to get a little bit lighter. It's getting closer to the light. Often when you're doing faces and you have a light source, whether it's just one or two or three or four different light sources, light kind of falls, if you think about it this way. If you have a head in space and there's a sun that's shining on their face, it strikes the thing that's closest to it first, which would be the forehead, and as the light moves down the face, things get subtly darker. So even if they're highlight on the chin, the highlight on the chin will be slightly darker than the highlight on the forehead, because the light's coming from above that way. Obviously, if they're standing there with a torch underneath their chin, it's going to be the other way around. So, excuse me. Think about where your light source is. What is your light source? Is it a candle? Is it a spotlight? Is it natural daylight? How strong is it? Sort of how bright is the light shining on their head? Is it a grey day, the person's outside, it's going to be a little bit cooler and softer. If they're sitting on a beach in Marbella getting a suntan, it's going to be a lot brighter and warmer. So think if you're working in colours, temperature wise, but also intensity wise. How strong is this light? How subtle is your light source? So I'm also going to use the same application underneath to fill in the shadow shape. and move that around the shape of the base of the sphere. Just filling in the shape of the shadow. Now as the shadow gets further away from your object, your shadow will start to pick up the surrounding light from around it. So it's going to start to feel a little bit softer and lighter. So your edges might be sharper as it gets closest to the object down here. But as it moves away from the object, the edges will become a little bit softer. You're also going to have reflective light bouncing up off the surface. Now, as this is a lightish table I've put it on, it's still going to be lighter bouncing up. How that shadow flows around the edge. It's like a secondary shadow which comes around. It's still going to be darker than this bit up here, which is a highlight, but as it moves away from that, there's a grading of the light. So this is your highlight. We've put a layer down already, remember, of the whole base, which will be your lightest light, and as it starts to move away from that shadow, it gets a little bit darker. It's like a concentric ring. The face is no different, although it's not a ball, and it has undulations. Each element on the face has a shape to it, and you just got to think about, what is this shape doing? So when you look at the cheekbone, take it back to a picture of what I'm working on there. So this is an eye socket. This is where the cheekbone is. So this area is recessed. It's going to be darker. As it moves across and over the cheek, it's going to catch the light. But as the face drops away from the cheek, it becomes slightly darker. And as it moves around from this darkness towards the light, it gets lighter. And as it drops, we can't see underneath the chin, so it's a bit like the ball that we're doing at the moment, where we have a light area and a dark area. Now the dark isn't as dark because it's getting the light coming in underneath the chin. There's a light highlight here. It's like a reflected light from a light shirt. So this is cast. It's like a what they call cast light and cast shadows. This shirt is casting light onto the edge of her face, so it's actually lighter just about here. Let's move that down a little bit. Slightly lighter just along this edge, because it's the light's being cast from this collar, and it's the same on the other side. This light line here is a reflection of this light. It's a light reflection. So you get core shadows and cast shadows. Your highlight and your casted light. So your object is casting light onto the surface, and the surface is casting light onto your object, and your object is casting shadows onto your object, and so you have this kind of toing and froing of light over a surface. What's light and what's dark. Go back to your observations, and if you break that down, because it sounds quite complicated, but if you just break it down into its simple shapes, say for example the shadow that goes around her neck over to the back of her shoulder here is a triangle. It's darker in this bit here, and it gets lighter towards this bit, but this bit is darker than this bit. This bit is catching the light a little bit from this collar, but as it moves around and away from it, it gets slightly darker and darker and darker and darker until this dark point. But that whole space, the shadow shape, is a triangle with a curve on it. So if you break your shadow shapes down into shapes and then look at the transition of light in those shapes from dark to light, you start to get a contouring of your forms. You can see how the neck muscles come down in front that would meet down sort of onto the collarbone, so they can move around, these neck muscles. They're rounded and they're soft and they follow a shape of the neck around. We can see this very strong dark area which is behind her neck, which is quite dark because it's not getting much light, in contrast with the colour of her shirt. So it creates a nice, again, sort of triangle shape. So you could break it down to simple shapes. It doesn't matter if it's a squiggly line, a circle, a square, or whatever. Look at the object and the elements in it and draw those. Don't try and guess them. You can link these things up as well. This little dark area, this darkest dark area, has a shape to it, a triangular shape. But you see that point there is in alignment with the corner of that mouth. So these shapes can actually help you locate positioning of other objects and how they all start to link together to give the illusion of a face. It's those elements that you start to build to get a sense of representationalism, like a reality of something. You can expand on that. You can pull and push. You can fade things out. You can soften edges intentionally. You can make edges harder and more geometric to give you a certain feel to it. You think Picasso, how geometric his faces were. Their natural face wasn't as geometric and harsh. Positioning thing, he moved them around so you could get the illusion of seeing things from different dimensions and perspectives. You can play around with it because you can do anything you want. It's there for your choice, your artistic voice as well. So if you're trying to create a sense of reality, though, you start to work within the rules of how, I say rules, the guides of how light works. Again, this is so light, my camera's having a real paddy trying to focus in on it, but even with very simple shading, we're starting to get a three-dimensionality to it. We're starting to see where the core shadow is. It's the core shadow of the ball as it sits on the table, what the background is. I'll zoom out a little bit. Tends to do better that way. We can refine the edges as we go along, so if that is a little bit too light in places, I can fill in the little spaces. Again, I'm very conscious not to change my direction too much, but sometimes you have to sort of get into the smaller areas and just follow the form a little bit better to give you a sense of what's going around. So you can start to use your pencil strokes in the flow and form of the object. So as this comes round, moving my pencil around to get the feeling of flow of that shadow. So start to move my pencil around in that kind of shape. So this needs to be a bit darker because it's a little bit too light, so I'm going to take my pencil and go around, same thing as it comes around this side. It's going to get a little bit of a contrast between this background and this foreground. This is where you start refining edges as well. As it comes around here, it's going to catch light both from coming from this direction, but this is going to be a stronger light bouncing up here, so onto the ball. So there might be a slightly tighter edge of that core shadow. It might not be as dark as this bit, but it might be a tighter edge. So I'm just taking my time filling those out. So it's light applications over and over and over again will give you the control that you need to create the changing forms and shapes and tones. It's going to be darkest over here because it's away from the light. It's not getting any light cast up on it, so this is going to be your darkest area on the sphere. So I can control that with a slightly harder edge. And as that transitions around, so it moves around the shape. It's going to get a little bit lighter as it comes down here because light's being cast upon it. It's still going to be darker than the highlight. So you might hear me say, oh, this is lighter. I don't mean light. I mean it gets a little bit lighter. So it's all about degrees of light and dark. But you're really sculpting at this point. You're creating the illusion of depth through sculpting your graphite onto the surface to give you a very strong darkness to transition into a lighter darkness, if that makes sense. So just building that up slowly. But I know that transitioning into this, as this ball comes around, this area needs to be a lot darker. I don't mean as dark as my foreshadow, I just mean a lot darker than I've got it at the moment. So I'm going to pop another layer of graphite on there. And I'll move it around that shape. There'll be more definition because the background's going to be dark, and with more definition and crispness to the edge of this as it moves around. So I'm just going to redefine where my ball actually stops and starts. So sometimes as you go through this process, you lose some of the edges of your shadow shapes. You could think about this entire background as a shadow shape. So it looks a bit like a tunnel shape that way. So you might need to redefine them and go back in and just sculpt in where that line comes across this way, over and down this way, and as it gets to this point, the background becomes a little bit lighter. Now I don't mean you make it lighter, but you need to make this darker. It's the same tone in the background all over, but as it comes around this point, this is actually darker. So I'm now going to contour my line still on the ball, but I'm actually thinking about this is the part of the ball. This I'm sort of concentrating on that being the background. As it comes around here, this is the ball itself, or sphere. I take that shadow into the ball. With these shadow shapes that I've got here, this line that I was saying there was no lines, then I drew a line. I'm just reaffirming the shadow shape with the edge quality, and then I'm going to take that edge and move it out towards the background. That makes sense. The problem about describing these terms is that it sounds incredibly... oh, Calabashi, thank you. Hello, you're over there on Twitch. Good to see you again. You joined me yesterday. I was doing a quick paint. So I'm just talking about light and tone and tonal tips today, using pencils. Talking about lights and darks, how you transition between one dark and a light dark. This is a divisible form, but you can use this on anything three-dimensional. The other thing to apply to it is textures, the texture of your object. But your textures would still have lights and darks in them. So say this is a Ferrero Rocher. Not advertising any other chocolate, any other chocolates are available. But say this is a Ferrero Rocher chocolate, it would still have this light form to it. It would still have cast shadows and cast light and a core shadow and a highlight and the background and the foreground, and you just apply your texture to it. But here, where the light source is coming in, it would be the lightest part of your Ferrero Rocher, or Malteser would be another good example. be the lightest part of your Malteser, and as you move around it, it will be your darkest part of your Malteser. It doesn't matter the texture, it matters the light to give you form. I could just put a Ferrero Rocher texture on it and it would look very flat with texture. It would look like a disc with a Ferrero Rocher texture to it. Those who don't know what Ferrero Rocher are, you can see the adverts for them on YouTube. But you get the gist. It could be a ping pong ball. It'll be very smooth. It could be a tennis ball, which might be slightly fluffy. So your textures can be applied to your surface, but the object has a form which follows light. So that's how I'm trying to describe it. It sounds contradictory when I say don't draw lines, and I do kind of a re-establish my shape of my object by kind of sculpting in a line around it, but I'm actually going to obliterate that line now by including it into the background so it disappears. So I'm left with one area of tone, which is the background which I'm doing right now, would lead you up to the edge of your object, which creates the edge. Now that edge can be hard and crisp, or soft and fluffy. And bounce light, yeah. The bounce light would be how the light is striking the table and bouncing up, a reflective light, bouncing up onto your object underneath. And that where it becomes your darkest dark will be where these two areas meet, because there's no light hardly getting in underneath the ball. It's going to be very crisp, very dark. But the blurring of these two things, because it's also going to be very dark on the ball itself and very dark on the table, you might not get a very, very crisp edge. Again, this all comes down to observation of your object. You might think about these two edges being how two lips meet to create a very dark line of a mouth. This is how one form moves around this way and how one form moves around that way. So think about the contouring element of your object, the contouring shape of your object. What's light, what's dark. Let that be your guide as to how you apply your graphite or your charcoal. But to break it down to simple shapes first, shadow shapes, or form, shadow shapes, and then tone. What's light, what's dark, and how you build those things up. And you just take your time and build it in steps. This is going to be darker around this area. It's darker around this bit in general, but as this darkness moves around to the front of the ball, it's going to catch more light. There's going to be more light bouncing up onto your surface. There's going to be a little bit more shape to this bit, because it might be a little bit more shadow. It'll be a cast shadow. This object is casting a shadow onto the table surface. Building that up. You can see the contouring of this shadow and how that moves around. It gives you this kind of elliptical shape, and it has to kind of, obviously if I had a square shadow coming off a round object it would look a bit weird. It's going to be a curved shadow because it's a curved object. Angela, good morning, afternoon. Yeah, good to see you. Thank you very much for your likes and comments this week. We appreciate it. I know some of you might be sick of me on social media at the minute, because I've been posting a bit with Sky Portrait Artist of the Week. It's finished now, there isn't any more left, which is quite sad, but I have enjoyed doing them. They've really helped me figure some painting issues out. So although it's not necessarily my normal way of painting, I do paint people's faces, but I put them into a context which has a slight imaginative realism to it. Painting from life is really good exercise, and there's no hiding from errors and things that you need to develop. So that's been a really good process to learn as it's gone through and gone on. I'll show you a little sort of time lapse of my my effort from last week in a second. But yeah, I'm just working up these lights and tones. This exercise you might already have recognised, Angela, from doing some of your studies, and it's a good exercise to do. I find if I was to do these in my, because I teach sort of in art centres and things, if I was to do this in an art classroom, 50% of the class will be engaged with it, 50% of the class will be totally switched off and will be totally disinterested because it's boring, it's just a ball. What's the point of drawing a ball? They want to draw a ball, they want to do their painting of the dog that they've had, and that's what they really want to do. And it's one of these things that I encourage people to always draw and paint the things that they love, but these little exercises can help them do those things better. So it's some things I suggest. Sometimes I suggest actually doing this for some people. Other times I get them to do this in the thing that they're actually drawing. Say for example, if it's their dog, I get them to draw a basic shape of their dog out. I get them to draw the shadow shapes of their dog in. I get them to find and isolate what is the lightest part of their dog and what is the darkest part of their dog, and to draw those shapes in, and then get them to lightly render all over the surface and slowly build up their forms and textures. It's the same thing, it's a different object. It's the same process, it's just a different object. So you can think about this being the tip of a nose and how you treat a tip of a nose or an eyeball. You know, that's what I'm trying to get across when I do these kind of demonstrations. But if I just do a ball in the classroom, what you find is people just go, "Ah, God, I'm drawing another ball again, boring." So I tend not to do it like that. I'm just going over that whole surface again, but I'm missing out where I had my little area. You probably couldn't see it. I had my little area highlighted, or just drawn out, my shadow, my light shape drawn out. I'm now sort of going back over that sort of secondary shadow as it moves away from the light. And just going over that again. Again, I'm pulling my graphite right past the edge, because I can redefine my edge as I go along. And I see the shadow comes right the way up the back. There's no light getting past here, so this is a little bit darker. And it just helps me build that contouring shadow. And it's slightly softer on the edges, so I know it needs to be a little bit darker around the edge of this. It's got a fluffier edge because the transition isn't harsh. If this was an angled box, the transition between light and dark would be quite hard. But this is a round shape, so light kind of spills over it evenly and softly. So as I describe that as evenly and softly, I start to apply my graphite evenly and softly all over. And that helps me build that transition between light and dark. To give me the illusion of this sphere shape, because it's a soft application, I'm getting a soft transition of light. I've got a softer, smoother surface. So, like skin can have a soft transition, you need to look at those things, but then occasionally in the face you get a harder edge. So, again, just flick back to the face there. Can you see how this is a slightly darker, harder transition, because the eye orbit is a hole, so at this point, even with the skin going over it, it's going to be darker, and the transition between dark and light is much starker than, say, the transition between dark and light across her nose and her cheek. So it's lighter around her cheek because it's catching the most light, but as it goes up the side, it's going to get slightly darker. But as it goes over the bridge of the nose, it's going to catch more light again, so it gets lighter. And as it goes down the other side, it gets darker. And as it goes around the other cheek, it gets lighter in this area. It's not as light as this area because the direction of the light is slightly coming down from this direction. So it helps you give you dimensionality because of light on a form. It starts to make things appear closer to you because they've got more light on them and tend to get pushed back. They get darker. They recede from the light. You like the repetition of the shading like that? I find it calming. It is, yeah, incredibly. You're not odd at all. I find it. A lot of people do find. As things starting out, there is a hurriedness just to get it over with because they don't want to muck things up. And in the process of speeding up, as I said earlier on, slow is fast, fast is slow. In the process of speeding up to get it hurried up and done because there's so much pressure to get it right, you muck it up. So slow down and take your time and observe what you're doing. That observation of what you're doing is important. If you finally get to this stage and you just think, I just need to take a break because I'm exhausted from doing that, then fine, take a break. Through doing it over and over again, through lots of different drawings and paintings and things like that, it becomes therapeutic that I don't have to think. This area is just one tone, so I'm just building up that one tone. I don't have to think about anything else. Literally about nothing else. And I can just concentrate on putting that tone down. Hence the reason for holding your pencil at the end of your pencil and for having a long point. I'm not drawing with a point, I'm drawing with the side of the pencil. I'm not drawing like this because I can't see my pencil on the paper. I'm having to guess where it is. Also, the pressure is quite hard and it's hard to get a soft application when you hold it like that. Holding it at the end means you've got a light application and you can build up your tone as you develop your shape. Already this is becoming three-dimensional in a sense, but we can go darker still. I want to get rid of this line I've created and leave you with a shape. So I'm going to take that tone all the way out. So the lines start to disappear into the shadow shapes and light shapes, and you're left with the form of the object. And this is the same thing no matter what you're drawing. Whether you're drawing a tree, you want to be left with the illusion of the tree, not the outline of a tree. See, now I'm starting to follow the direction in my pencil strokes of the object, but I'm not left with pencil strokes, I'm just blocking in my shadow shapes. So this is kind of the blocking in stage, drawing the positioning of all those shapes and I'm blocking them in, and then I'm breaking down the edges of those shadows from dark to light. I might think this table's a little bit too stark. If I could, I could put a very sharp contrasting edge on this table to really define it from the background, and it would have an effect on how it looks. Or I could have it quite soft transition into this area, so it becomes like a ball in space. You're not quite too sure where the background is. It gets a bit fuzzy and dark. So I can do that as well. I could take that through all the way through and soften that transition. So the edge of the table isn't as quite as important, but it puts more clarity on the object itself. So if I was to have a tabletop, say, that this ball was sitting on, and say just then concentrate on about building up this form. This form of the shadow. So it can meet this edge has become a little bit too light, so I've got to darken this down again. So still a light application. I'm not scrubbing my pencil into it to make it as dark as possible, but already I'm starting to see depth and darkness in it, and I do need to make it go darker, but not yet. I'm allowing the forms to build. This is going to be darker, it's away from the light. The cast shadow it can't be the same light as your lightest light. It has to be darker. This is your lightest light as it moves around. Your cast light can't be the same lightness as your object it's lit from. So the tabletop can't be as light as the highlight underneath the ball. This has to be a little bit darker. As light gets reflected, it's always darker in the reflection. Even when you look in the mirror, everything in that mirror is slightly darker than reality. So if you had a mirror reflecting into a mirror, reflecting into a mirror, reflecting into a mirror, and so on and so on and so on, the object at the end would be really dark, because the light is getting bounced into each object, and as it gets bounced into each object, it becomes a little bit darker as it goes on and on and on and on, until the point you can't see it. So think sort of those kind of mirrors that you can kind of angle and up and out. You're looking in one. If you look in the reflection of the mirror in another one, it's tonally darker. So think about it that way. This light here can't be as light as this point. It's light being bounced up onto the object, therefore it's going to be, as you said before, Calabashi over on Twitch, it's a bounced light. That way. So this is going to be a little bit darker than the light as it comes up here, so I only have to kind of darken that bit down as it comes around here. It's going to be darker still. As it moves away from that point, it's going to get lighter. So your two objects are meeting at this point, but as we move away from it, it gets lighter. The edges get fluffier because they're not quite so crisp anymore, because there's other light getting around it. It kind of dilutes it a little bit. It's very crisp here because there's hardly any light getting in, but as light moves around the object, it will pick up the surface lightness as well. So just go back over it and over it and over it and over it and over it. You can start adding more pressure to it to make it go darker, but I'm not pushing so hard I'm scrubbing the paper still. I'm just gliding it across the surface to build it up. If I want it to get dark, I can go for another grader pencil. So this comes round. So this core shadow that I've got at the back, this bit that's the furthest away from the light source on the object, as it comes around it's going to get a little bit lighter. It's going to be infused with the light around the object. I say infused, I meant diffused. Yay, more light around us, so enthusiastic. But I meant diffused. Or watered down, whichever way you want to describe it. Diluted. I'll be careful with the terminology because say diluted and people start adding water to their pencil. I'm not talking about water fluidity. I'm talking about an intensity of light. I don't know whether to keep. Yeah, I should. I'm going to keep the same structure of the horizon line just to make it easy. This still will have, although it's a light surface, it will still have some sort of depth to it. So as things go away from the object, they get darker, even if it's a light table. It'll still be slightly darker over here in the background. So this will be slightly darker over here in the background, and as it comes forward, get lighter and lighter and lighter until it meets that shadow. And as that shadow comes out to even foreground area, this is where it can become as light as the page. But I'm just literally putting a light layer of graphite down, just as I did in the beginning of this whole surface, just to give me that illusion that this is also a solid object that the ball is sitting on. Try and go back in the same direction. So as the background disappears behind the object, ball in this case, sphere, that line will be crisper. I might need to kind of refine that edge a little bit. I thought there for a second if I'd left the camera angle onto the picture of the portrait that I was doing. If I move it that way a little bit, you'll be able to see it. That might be a little bit better. I'll wait for the cameras to pick back up again. You have to type and let me know if things aren't in shot. Because I'll be checking the text. I'm not looking at the camera shot. As I say, I'm doing this by myself, so I don't know. You can help me out. So yeah, this is going to be darker here. So I'm taking that darkness and I'm moving it into the ball itself. I think it needs to be still darker down here. maybe a little bit too light. As you darken an area down, how it transitions into another area, as you do one bit, it has a knock-on effect. It makes you go back over the other area and darken that down. This is, I think, a little bit too light. It's a little bit too much of a contrast between these two things, so I'll darken that down a little bit so it comes out to be the object up here. It's going to be a little bit in shadow because it's underneath the ball. See the transition here of light to dark is going to be a little softer. It's got a contour to it, contoured light, because the contour is going around the shape of the ball. I think I'll bring this out a little bit, widen it up a little bit. It's a little bit too thin. So I'm thinking about how that light comes over the top of this. At one point the background here is going to be the same tonality, just at one little point, it's going to be the same tonality as the ball itself. So this area up here, the background is darker than the ball. As that darkness comes around and the darkness of the ball starts to exist, these two things start to meet, and there'll be a point just about here of how that tone and that tone are exactly the same. So I can take them backwards and forwards. Just create the same tone. Here, it's going to be a little bit darker. The background is darker than the ball. Concentrate on blending that into the entirety of that background. Here you notice I've still got the same tone as I've got up here, so I bring this around, but because this is a lot darker, the background appears to be lighter. You see what I mean? So this is the same tone I'm doing all the way around the ball in the background, but it's the light on the object which appears darker here and lighter here. This is the same tone. Now, I can look at it that there might be a light source in the background which has a light shining on the wall as well, and it gets from lighter to darker, or it could be uplit from behind the table, so it could be lit here and darker up here. Whatever that is, look at your reference. What is that telling you? What the surrounding light is doing? But try and stick within those rules to begin with, that guide to begin with. You can manipulate it as you develop your artistic voice, but if you're just trying to understand light at the minute and rendering, how to get from light to dark, stick to some of the simple basics, get used to them, and then explore and expand upon them. Say there's no rules in art, there's no art police that are kicking your door, but if you're doing it with a sense of purpose, there will generally be a conceptual reason why you're doing it, and that will follow through into your work that will become coherent. If you're not too sure why light's doing a certain thing and you start manipulating it and you don't know how to control it, like a dimmer switch and turn it up and down, if you've got no control in it, it becomes a bit lost and muddy and messy. Now, I'm trying to do it so I've got a soft rendering between these two things. I could scribble all of my marks and do exactly the same thing. I could tap my paper with dots and do heavy dark dots down here, transitioning into lighter dots up here. It's the same thing. That's mark making. So however you want to do it, whatever the textual element is you want to achieve, it's exactly the same process. Lights to dark, creating form. Transitioning between one and another. As it comes around here. I'm going to take a quick moment just to soften all of this down, using a soft brush again, just so I can clarify a few things for my own eye. I might need to go in with the rubber and just lift some areas out around here just to refine this edge a little bit, and go in with some heavier graphite in other areas to darken it, and just to crispify the edges, like to tighten them up, and to others kind of soften them up a little bit more. So it's light on this side. As it moves around this way, it's going to get a little bit darker. It's moving away from your light source. That'll be crisper at that point. You can really spend your time just really filling in the space with nice even brush strokes or pencil strokes. So it's not about speed, it's just about the quality of the mark or the surface that you want to try and achieve. Get that right first. Worry about speed later, just take your time. In fact, don't worry about speed at all. It'll take the time that it needs. So if I'd said to you right at the very beginning of ArtCat about, yeah, we're going to spend 2 hours drawing a ball, nobody would have watched. Everybody would have just gone, oh, you're kidding me. Got to mow the grass and do the washing up. But this is the same thing. When I talk to people about what they're drawing, it's the same thing. It's exactly the same process that I take people through. How they draw it, the quality of their marks is going to become their own independent art voice, and that happens through time. Visually, what interests them is their own art choice. You know, you could have a chiaroscuro effect that it's very, very strong, dramatic lighting, that you're constructing this scene of rich darks and powerful lights, and it's all, you know, dramatic. Or it could be really soft and subtle and calm and so kind of mercurial and gentle and quiet. You know, the lighting has an effect. That's why they use lighting in theatre, music videos, and in homes as well. You got to think about how you might use light at home yourself. How at night time, if it's a winter's night and you've drawn the curtains and you've got a fire lit, you don't want to stick the big light on. You want to maybe have a little lamp on beside you, and it's quite cozy and warm, and you curate your space around light. Well, it's the same thing about curating your picture with light as well. How you soften things and contain them in certain spaces, and define edges and sharpnesses of objects as well. If I'm going off on a rant, by the way, you can disagree. If you come across other elements, or if you've come across other videos or explanations about things, tell me about them. Put the links up, talk to me about them. I'm always open to learning myself, so I wouldn't say this is the best demonstration of a circle drawn ever, but I think it hopefully gets the point across about what I'm talking about today. I'm just filling in this a little bit more. It's got a little bit fluffy here, which I need to kind of redefine. I'll redefine that with the eraser. I'm going to talk about the eraser as well in a second. But I also said I was going to soften this a little bit. There is my soft brush with my brush, and often when you use your brush to soften it, it'll get lighter. So you have to put more on. And I'm following the flow of the light. As it moves around that shape. A bit around the edge, around here. Moves around the light. Comes down. It's going to be darker there. Certainly a bit more darker underneath, but catches the light, being bounced back up. Darkness of my shadow needs to be a little bit darker and more dense. So I might need to move a greater pencil as it comes back from the background. Then here, it's darker at the back and lighter at the front. Darker at the back. And lighter at the front. So we're starting to get that real form starting to happen, but I need to kind of refine a couple of things. So my edges, it's going to be crisper closest to the light source. I'm going to talk about that. So I'm just redefining it where they've sort of brought that graphite into the form a little bit too much up here. I'll take that back a little bit. I'm literally going over the surface really lightly, using it like a pencil, like I'm shading in. I'm actually removing the graphite, but I'm using it like a pencil. So it's a bit of a weird process. You're actually creating a lighter surface area. Say my highlight is about there. I'm going to rub right back into the paper. Just redefine this edge. so I'm getting lost in the process of it there. Guys, have you got any questions at all? Hopefully this is answering some of your processes, Michael. I say it's not necessarily a nose and a face, but you can see the transition between light and dark, and how you can create the illusion of a surface that way. It's the same process if you're using charcoal. Charcoal comes off a lot easier, so you'll get a lot more layered down quick if you're trying to be really light and gentle with it. You know, maybe think about using some of your harder charcoals first, very, very lightly, and manipulating them together by using your brush or maybe one of the sponges that you can use, but do it lightly if you're trying to get a light surface. You can use a white chalk pencil over the top of charcoal as well, or a white pastel pencil, but do it with almost like a cross-hatching effect, very, very light application of similar as I'm using this rubber. If you imagine this being the charcoal pencil, about just lightly layering it up that way, by going over the whole surface just in lines. You've got to be careful about that application though, because sometimes if you put it over too much over charcoal, you get like this bluiness, where the white pastel mixes with the charcoal and it gives you like a white, a very muddy greyish colour. So think about, just be sparingly and slowly build it up. But often using a eraser in this fashion, you can do the same thing with charcoal as well, where you can just sort of rub through it. Don't forget to clean your rubber off now and again. It's a tendency I have to get lost in doing what I'm like just doing your drawing. You don't realise that your tools start to get filled with bits of graphite that you do need to clean your rubber occasionally. So I'm actually going to turn this into a bit of a video about light and shade and dark and tone, and just to kind of break it down into its very simple basic forms, and I'll pop that out as well. Instructional video wise, if there's anything you want me to cover, let me know, and I can do a little video on it. I've been doing them for the school where I work as an art technician, just to help some students with some basics. They're kind of easy, sort of 10-minute watches. They're not perfect, but they are helpful. Oh, Alex, as well. I've just noticed you popping up. It's funny, in the other two chat streams, the text come down from the top. On Facebook, they pop up from the bottom. So, hello. Is there a really good way of cleaning your rubber? Thankfully, you've only just popped that up, because I wouldn't have seen you otherwise. Yes, use the paper that you're drawing on to clean it. Not the actual paper, but if you've got another style of paper to it. So basically another sheet of this paper. I'm doing it on this one just because it's efficacy and it's easier to do. And try and maintain the edge of your rubber as well, the shape of it. Because you can hone it to a point. I like sort of the crispness of the edge that these mono erasers come with. It's like a little propelling. You kind of pop the base out, and it gets taller and thinner, and then you can push it back in if it's too long. But it's got a really nice consistency to it. It's hard, but it's got a little bit of give to it. There's one I got from where was it? There it is. Yeah, from General's Pencil Company. This Factus. This is another style, but you can see the difference in size. So if I want a slightly bigger area to take away, I would use that one. But small refined areas, I use this one. But I can generally use that by going over sort of a larger space. So it depends on what you feel comfortable with. James Phillips, hello. Trying to figure out which way where you are. You are on YouTube. Hi Lee, just come to this after watching the portrait portion. Oh, great, on Instagram. Great, thank you very much. Looks very informative and useful. Well, I hope so. If I'm teaching things or showing things off and they're totally useless, do tell me. If they don't make any sense, let me know. Alex, you're saying you just got there, you're over on Facebook. He suggested a topic on how to mix colours using pan pastels. I haven't got that many colours of pan pastels myself. I've got a white and a black because I do an awful lot of monochrome stuff. But yeah, definitely. Pan pastels works well with the pastel pencils as well. This is something else you want to think about. That it's got pan pastel's got such a lovely coverage to it. It's almost liquidy when you put it on with sponges and things. But it is like mixing a palette up, so you can literally mix it up like paint. And have a separate applicator. It's the applicator putting the pastel on. You've got to keep that clean and clean them off, because otherwise it gets very muddy very quick. But you can go over your pastel base with pan pastel pencils or pastel pencils, which gives you a much more level of degree of control. Michael's saying that was great, working away on my own. A great tip on using the eraser pencil like shade and light, so to speak. It is exactly like that, shade and light. Perfect way of you've explained it better than I did. So Jane, thank you very much for that. Yes, I put up a thing on Instagram and YouTube about proportions of a head. They are the basic proportions of a head. It's something you can adapt to the face that you're looking at or drawing from reference photograph. Because it's structural. Like the skull that I made, you'll see in the video, is a generic skull. Everybody's skull is slightly different, but physicality-wise, it has all the same elements in the same places. So humans all generally have two eyes. I know there are exceptions. I know there are people who've lost an eye. I know there are people who have differences in their face and their skin tone and things like that. I'm talking about in general terms, just to get you started with your proportions and things like that. So that's hopefully what you get something out of that. I love portraits because people are different. You know, it's not a case of doing the same face over and over again. Although I do like drawing Andrea a lot, but I like doing different faces, and they have different qualities to them and different challenges to them, and contours are slightly different, and how light falls on their face is different depending on where they're located, but also tonality wise, you know, everybody's face is different. Somebody with freckles is different from, say, somebody with a tan. You know, people with oily skin or dry skin. All of these different elements go to make up a wealth of different elements. And then there's a connection with people as well. So, I mean, I said before, even if it's a landscape, you're painting a landscape, it's your reflection of that landscape which makes it about you, which is in a way a really weird way of doing a portrait, but it's still a portrait of your vision of a landscape, if you know what I mean. I know it sounds odd. You can do a still life of objects as well. from and about a person and curate them in a space, that is a still life, but it's still very much about a portraiture of a person. It's about your tastes or feelings, and that it always makes that human connection. I don't think you can really get away from it, and why would you want to get away from it? Because your paint is about a communication of yourself, and you are a person, hopefully. Unless there's aliens watching and you're having a go as well, and then please do get in contact. Yes, you must need pencils too. He's talking about the pastels. Yeah, I mean, it gives you a greater flexibility. Again, there is a plethora of different brands out there for pastel pencils. You get pastel blocks as well, and you can use those, and you can use the paper stubs to draw with those pastels into your drawing, so you can use them that way. I can do a thing on colours. Yeah, I'll see if we can get some pastels together. It might not be soon because obviously COVID and finance and things, so I will endeavour definitely to do something along those lines for sure. That's brilliant, Alex. So great suggestion there. So guys, if you've got any other suggestions, feel free to throw them in. I mean, I can come up with suggestions and do them, but I just want to make sure that they're going to be relevant for you guys. There's no point we do videos when you don't want to know how to do certain stuff. I don't know if you saw my little time lapse of my throwing on a potter's wheel that was over on Instagram. I was making some hump molds, which is a very descriptive term for a hump of plaster, which you can make bowls on by putting clay over them. So I went through some bowls and filled them full of plaster and made these hump molds. But I did a little time lapse of me throwing a bowl on a potter's wheel, which is actually where my background in my artistic journey kind of started from. I've got my degree in fine craft design and ceramics, and I'm not a potter now as such. I don't do it on a regular enough basis to say I'm a potter or a ceramicist, but I do like getting on the wheel occasionally. So yeah, just did a little fun, a quick video of throwing a pot, which is fun. It's kind of quite nice to get my hands dirty again. Now and again I'll do a bit of sculpture. It's just something different. I quite like challenging myself and keeping myself animated or visually inspired to do different things, and then I can concentrate on doing my paintings and drawings and things. So hopefully this ball shape thing is, you can start to see the qualities of it. Where I've crisped and sharpened and cleaned that edge, there's more definition now of the ball. As this area was darker, the ball is darker, the background feels lighter, but it's not. It's the same tone as this. This looks darker because this is lighter, and the form of the ball is lighter, and how light is hitting it and moving across and around the ball as it gets darker here, and then lighter here underneath because the light's being bounced up off the table, and we have the shadow of the ball. So hopefully, as a little quick demonstration, again I can layer more pencils onto that. Let's see, we could do this with the pencils as well. There's no reasons why you can't. Let's look, see what I've got in there first. Got a B. I noticed this with the propelling pencils. When you get a softer propelling pencil lead in the propelling pencils, it comes out darker than it would do in a normal wooden pencil. If that makes sense. So you don't tend to get sort of a 9B in a pencil lead in a propelling pencil because it's very soft and it would snap really easily. But you can get a relatively strong dark with a B, and you can go up to 2B, which is very soft as well. You can get 4B ones. I have seen 4B propelling pencil leads. I haven't seen much above that, but you can get quite dark with them. But it's all about the level of control that you want to try and create. And this is just a B pencil, but it comes off so much darker. And what I'm going to do is just clean up this edge a little bit of my table. Bring it right up to the edge where these two things meet. Take it out. Side. And meet them back up. So there's like a halo effect happening here, which I want to try and get rid of. Just taking your time, fill up the space, and go back over the surface again. And it has been a lot of tips and info. Thanks. No, you're more than welcome. My pleasure. And thanks for your lovely comments this week. It's always nice to see when he puts posts up on Instagram. You kind of going, is anybody getting it? And then suddenly, people pop up and go, very cool, like that, lovely. And likewise, when I see your posts up there, Angela, your paintings are coming along a treat. So your portraits and things. You should definitely do some. I think you should be brave. Maybe do a couple of little videos of your experience on the course that you're on, because it might help and encourage other people to have a go at doing it, and give you a bit of confidence talking about your work as well, because it's class, brilliant, really good stuff. So I'll show you quickly my little attempt from last week of painting Otimabusi. So ready for this? Won't take long. Now, that's not the time-lapse video that I put up on Instagram. But did you notice there's like Otimabusi and then Jill Nalder from the week previous pops up? It's because I had that as my time-lapse pause, because I'd need to go for a break or a cup of coffee or cigarette or whatever, and I would put my time-lapse on of the week previous. So in between all of my video, it keeps jumping back to Jill Nalder, so I was trying to cut all of that out. So I cut it out for Instagram, but I just haven't managed to do it for this yet. But I can show you the original of that. If I can close those two screens. Mortified? Why are you mortified, Angela, over on YouTube? You shouldn't be mortified. It's lovely. It works really good. There we go. I'll get my screens together. So, oh god, mouse control is terrible. There we are. That one there. There, good. Now I can see everybody all together. So, over on the side, painted quite small for me, really. There she is. You can probably see it against on a smaller screen. If that makes sense. So that's the Otimabusi. It's only a small 10x8. It looks massive on the screen in comparison. but as we look at the size of my hand to the size of the ball to the size of Odie, it's relatively small. So it was kind of fun to play around on a smaller scale. I kind of enjoyed doing it. I did do it within the 4 hours as well, although the stream itself is a little bit longer than 4 hours because I took a few breaks. So yeah, I kind of miss doing that. When is video coming out, Angela? You say that to Angela. Good. I think we should all gently encourage Angela to talk about one of her works. It's a great confidence builder because it gets you to think about how you actually do stuff, and it re-emphasizes. It's a great way of learning. It re-emphasizes the knowledge in your head. It's one of my top tips. Sometimes people will write what they've done down as a way of remembering things, but a good way of, even if you don't broadcast it, try it out. Never mind. Oh dear. Oh man, thank you, Michael. He said it's a really good painting. Really captured the. Do you know what? I really loved her lightness, and I painted it lighter. I wasn't necessarily trying to keep to the colours of Otimabusi, but I wanted to keep it lighter because he's such a light, joyful character. And there was such a great conversation between her and Curtis as well. They were really having fun, really enjoying what they were doing, and I think that was an important element to try and get across in that portrait for me personally. That's why I did it that way. So yeah. So this is all I'm doing here is just redefining. Where I redefined the edge with the light, I'm going over the background and just reaffirming the background darkness and the edges in there as well. So the edges surrounding your object are an element in your picture which is still important because they're like the supporting actors. The supporting elements of your picture can add a believability or a truth to your object as well. So how you can look at how this background tone works, going from transition between light and dark. As it goes behind the table, it's got to be a contrast against the table, as this table is darker in the background. Although it's a white table, it's going to appear to be a little bit darker because it's further away from you, and it'll help you create the illusion of that light moving towards you, give it a certain sense of depth. Oh, Jane, thank you very much. She said I captured her beautifully. Captured it. You captured her, his beauty. Yeah, her beauty. Yeah, she's just a lovely, joyful character. Her smile was amazing. I didn't do her. She was wearing a pair of glasses on the stream as well, and I didn't do her with a pair of glasses. Not because I can't do glasses, because I wear glasses and I've done self-portraits with me wearing them. Not because she's wearing glasses and I can't do them. I actually think sometimes when you draw a pair of glasses, it's a great architecture on the face to draw around. But it was the light reflection. Now, they kind of mentioned about it. It was like that halo light, and it reflected when she was talking to the camera an awful lot. It was just a distraction. I like the shape of her glasses and everything like that, but it took away the size of her eyes as well. So I didn't do the glasses. Oh, Alex, you're saying what's the best platform to watch me on? Because I'm doing it across split platforms. Wherever you feel comfortable. I'll always try and get to each of the streams. I've been streaming a lot on Twitch as a platform. Purely simply, Facebook and YouTube have their genres, and there's billions of people on it. I quite like Twitch because there's a community of artists. There's actually a section for art, and there's people from all over the world doing art at all different levels. A lot of people starting out and starting off their painting. A lot of semi-professionals, some professionals. There's not that many professionals. artists on there full time. There's a lot of digital art on there. There's some lots of gaming stuff. I'm not into gaming myself, but I've communicated with a lot of really good artists there. So I put this through Twitch to Facebook and YouTube. So do it that way. Jane, you said you struggle with skin tones. Would be great if you could have some pointers towards that. Yeah, definitely I could do a thing on skin. My tip. Oh, you swapped back again from Facebook. So Alex, you're now over on YouTube. Hello. Trying to find out where you are. Yeah, skin tones. What colour is skin? I should leave that for you to ponder. I tell you now, it's not flesh tint. I hate with a passion any paint that has flesh tint on it, because it's never. I don't know a human being that looks pink, that pink. It's a base colour at best, which you can manipulate to be any colour you want to be. The colour of different people's skin to reflect their ethnicity can change under the light source. If you put me in a nightclub and watch all of the I'm going to say disco lights to show you how old I am. I was born in the 70s. So the disco or nightclub lights, whatever you want to call it. And when they hit my face, I can suddenly turn blue. But it's how you change that blue over my face is going to change it. So yeah, interesting about skin tone. I know what you mean though, so I will definitely do something on that, definitely. But it's something to think about. What you perceive as being colour for a skin, obviously you look at the image you're working from or the face that you're looking at. Try and see their colour. What colour are they in that lighting condition? And trying to get those colours onto your palette. That might help. Because often what you think is cream isn't blue or grey, you know, and how those colours can really help tune your face. In fact, check out Dan Ferguson on Instagram and look at his faces that he does, because he doesn't stick to this rule of what these colours are, but he creates these very interesting colour combinations of scenes and scenarios of a kind of retro feel to them, as in he uses old photography as a source of inspiration, but how he uses colour is really interesting, and they look believable still. So as in like they are a scene, but I just like the way he uses colour. So I kind of tailor that question with what colours do you like? You know, are you a colourful person? I often look to see how people draw, and it gives me an indication as to where their preferences lie in how they use the mediums. So working in a classroom environment with people from all age groups, I can see through looking at the work they've done what they're mostly interested in, whether they're sculptural, textural, analytical, you know, lots of different things. But I say, well, always work to your strengths. Don't be afraid of colour, because it's easy to change it. Top tip is go for your tone first, your tones of colour. You can paint with red, yellow, and blue, and green. If you get the right tone right, it doesn't matter what colour you're using, you can change the colours around. Getting the tone of your paint is right. It gives you the form and shape. Because if you take a photograph of it, so one of the guys I was watching on Twitch earlier on this week made the same point, that if you took a photograph of it in black and white, it will look great, because the tones are right. You can change your colours, but keep the tones right, get the tones right. So it's a bit like this. Even this is a tonal study of light and dark and form and texture, and building up layers and transitioning between a soft edge and a hard edge. So this now becomes a harder edge. fact. I just need to, as I talk and do things, I can see areas that I need to kind of redefine, and I have to do them. So, so this becomes a harder edge. This is a softer edge between these two lights. This is a softer edge down here. This is definitely soft around this part. So that transition of light to dark, hard to soft, shape, form, you can really get a sense of weight to something, a solidity to it. That ball looks like you can pick it up now. Whereas when I first started off, you saw how rough my circle was. Because I'm not great at drawing circles, I'm not a compass. You know, I can get a cup and draw around it. But you could see the circle shape that I was trying to draw was kind of all over the place to begin with. And I've just refined it as I've gone on, so I can curate my space around that ball. Here I've worked on the edge so it feels crisper and darker. It feels like the edge of the table is there. Here I haven't drawn the edge of the table as defined, and also if I was to bring it down dark here, part of this ball would disappear into it as the light transitions around the space. This disappears into the ball, but there's a definite darkness here which I need to develop and bring it around underneath the ball, get this reflected light feel back up. This shadow is darker here and gets lighter as it comes out, so this pool, the light sort of pools in underneath the ball. So hopefully that's what I mean by how you sort of rendering something. Understand your shape and your tones, and what is your shape actually doing? Is it going in or out? Is it getting closer to you or further away from you? Do you need to have a sharper, crisper edge to it, or does it need to be soft? There are always either or questions, and if yours is too harsh, soften it. If it's too soft, harden it. If it's too light, darken it. If it's too dark, lighten it. Think about it like dials on an old TV, where you're just turning them up and turning them down, and that's all it is. It's simple choices. Keep it nice and simple. I might have gone through some very long-winded explanations today in quite a technical term of building up shapes and forms and things, but that's basically it. It's like an old black and white TV with dials on it. Turn it up, turn it down, light, dark, sharp, soft. Make sense? So yeah, I've got over my little bit of 2 hours spiel that I would normally do, so hopefully you've enjoyed that today. I've had fun doing that. It's kind of, it's again, I've done these 1,000 times and they're kind of fun to do still now and again. I don't get to do my classes that often because they become about a ball and not about the reasoning of doing rendering. How I did rendering for that is exactly the same as I do rendering for a face, a truck, a landscape, a whatever. It doesn't matter. It's the same process. It's just a different object. Light, form, how light moves around it. Textures are about experiments and about how you apply those textures. So think about that Ferrero Rocher or that Malteser. If it was a Malteser on a table, still going to get light hitting it from one direction. Still going to get light bouncing up to it from another. Still going to be in space, sitting on a table. The texture of it is not going to be as smooth and round. It's going to be a little bit bumpy. Maybe slightly dings and dashes, so you get like flatter areas. Think about a Malteser, how you can get bashed around in the packet. Think about it as a perfect ball. It comes around with a certain amount of texture to it already. Ferrero Rocher, it's got little bits of crumbly bits on it and dark bits on it and light bits on it, but they move around the form. Same thing, move it around the form. Hope that makes sense. Alex, you're saying you just keep me on my toes. Yeah, that's alright, I don't mind that. How to take Lulu for a walk early? Oh yeah, you got a new dog. Yeah, gorgeous dog, I saw it. Thankfully we have cats and we just open the window and they escape for half an hour and they come back in. Your dog looked great. So yes guys, thank you very much, really appreciate you being here today and had fun. If you want to leave a message in comments below, if you're watching this on catch up at any time and you want to figure out, whoa, how do you do this or that or whatever, you can jump in, leave a little message or comment. You can subscribe and like the channel and you will get notifications when I go live. Guys over on Twitch, you've been a dream. been really fun all week. I go on there kind of on a regular basis. Occasionally I'll flip it over to Facebook as well, so I can stream on both. But I always keep for Saturdays. I always keep it that I do it on all three at the same time, and I'll post videos up of little kind of how-to videos. Post those up over on YouTube. Okay. Have fun. Enjoy your weekend. Hopefully we'll all be back to real world soon. Because lockdown is getting real boring now. It's now quite a year. In fact, I think next week. It is. Next week is actually a year that I've been doing this every Saturday. I think I missed one Saturday. Did I miss one Saturday? Took a couple of weeks off Christmas. We break over Christmas. So yeah, I've done nearly sort of 50 of them. Amazingly. Starting off with my phone, and then built up to a camera, and then 2 cameras and things. So yeah, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to carry on doing these after COVID as well on a Saturday. Even when my real life classes start up, what I tend to do is do my live class in the morning and then do my videos in the afternoon. So, with all that said and done, I'll see you later. Have fun, and see you on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook.